Okay, today we are going to go over the Demolitionist class. We're going to talk about what your attributes are like, what kind of skills you use, the gear you're looking for, and some of the devotions that you're going to be taking. The Demolitionist class as a whole is a fire-based AoE damage dealer. It's in the caster realm more than it is in the kind of offensive melee build. It does have some support for other damage types like lightning or chaos, and even some physical, but it's primarily fire. The Demolitionist plays well with other classes because it is mostly a damaged focused class that another supportive, more defensive class can help balance out what you're trying to accomplish with it. We'll jump over now and we'll take a look at some of the skills and abilities that you'll be using. Now, most demolitionists are going to be leaning a little bit into spirit, but mostly into physique, and that's how a lot of builds in Grim Dawn are. You want to lean into physique just because it supports your armor and your health, but we're going to have a decent portion into spirit because spirit is going to modify how much magical damage we do and give us bonus duration to any magic damage that we apply. For the skills, we're going to go through from top to bottom here. This is a very core one that is used by most builds. It's called Flame Touched. This is going to give you a flat fire boost, but also lightning and fire damage. And if you're leaning towards the lightning version of a demolitionist, this is a must pick. It also gives you additional offensive ability. If you're going to go a different route, which I don't see as often but is still viable, you can take Temper, and this is going to give you flat physical damage and then increase your physical and internal trauma damage while making you a little bit more tanky with the defensive ability. In terms of a defensive skill, what we have here is Blast Shield, and this will activate once you drop below a certain threshold, and it gives you a lot of resist to certain types, and then also lets you absorb a certain amount of damage. So kind of like a panic button that activates automatically. Nearly every build that you play as a demolitionist is going to use Fire Strike in some different fashion. This skill allows you to use it as its default weapon attack, which means you can take your left mouse button and you can swap your standard attack for your Fire Strike. The base version supports fire and physical damage. However, if you go down the line here, we have physical with burn, we have lightning damage with a extra fire percentage, and then down here we have more chaos. Looking at the next one here, this is Blackwater Cocktail, another very popular option for a build. This deals fire and burn damage. However, you can lean into Demon Fire for the chaos damage if you're looking to take it towards that kind of route. If you decide that you don't want to go towards the fire and burn and chaos route, you can take Stunjacks, which is going to start leaning towards the physical and lightning route. The full spread ability will increase your physical and lightning percent damage while also giving you internal trauma and electrocute damage over time. If you want to go towards a slightly different burn route, you can do the canister bomb, which is going to lean into pierce damage with fire. But then you could take concussive bomb, which will take your physical damage and convert it to lightning damage. Then the demolitionist has some skills that are just standard debuff skills, like flashbang here will confuse your target and lower their defensive ability. And the same thing with the searing light modifier, it just gives them a chance to impair the aim and make them fumble attacks. Vindictive Flame is another automatically activated buff, and since it just sits in the background, it's always a benefit to have if you're leaning into the fire and physical version of the Demolitionist. However, if you're going electric route, you can go with the Wrath instead, and it does the same kind of thing, but does give chances to knock down and reduce the target's damage. And then we have the skill Grenado, which is a purely physical version of a grenade. But if you'd really like to, you can modify it from 100% physical to lightning damage. And then this can be modified by high impact, turning Grenado into a physical trauma with a little bit of fire damage. And then the last thing here is going to be Shattering Blast for the Grenado, and this is going to give you some fire and crit damage with internal trauma. The skill Thermite Mine is very important to basically every build that uses the Demolitionist, and this is a resist reduction ability, and what that does is in the game there are these resistances that you have that reduce the damage that you take from a certain element, but monsters also have that as well. And then the higher up you go in the difficulty, the more resist they're going to have. So you start to apply resist reduction to them, that way you get more of your full damage through. And then there's Hellfire Mine. If you're leaning more towards the Chaos version of a Demolitionist, this will give your Chaos resist reduction. And here we have the Chosen ability. This will give you +1 charges to your Grenado, Canister Bomb, or Stun Jacks, which is really good to just keep applying more damage as the cooldowns cycle through. It also gives a chance to reduce the skill cooldown completely, so you can spam abilities that would generally take more time to be cast. And then lastly, we'll look at Mortar Trap. This is the pet kind of skill for the Demolitionist. There's not a lot of pet support, but this does scale with player bonuses, so you don't have to worry about doing any kind of pet bonuses. In Grim Dawn, there are two different avenues for increasing damage. It's either through your pets or through the player. And with characters like the Necromancer, their pets scale with the pet bonuses, but not with the player bonuses. However, with classes like Demolitionist or Druid, those will scale with player bonuses instead, so you don't have to try to lean your gear towards pet bonuses while your character needs all the survivability it does for its own bonuses. That being said, so this is Mortar Trap. This is the Demolitionist pseudo pet ability. Since it scales with player damage bonuses, you don't have to worry about doing the pet scaling, and it gives you a Mortar Trap that will last for a while. It deals some damage in the area. It does lean in towards the fire and physical aspects. However, if you're going for the lightning build and the physical build, you can use heavy ordnance to modify that. Now we'll take a look at the devotions for the Demolitionist. Depending on what build you run and your elemental type, but we'll look at the fire version of it since it tends to be the most common. For me, when I play, I usually grab something like the Imp, which will give us Aether Fire, which is going to be fire damage over time. And then there's the Witchblade, which will give us the Eldritch Fire ability. And then, much like the Hellfire Mines that have the resist reduction, this gives us more fire and chaos resist reduction. And then going further on, we have the Torch, which is going to give us Meteor Shower. And this is a large area of effect, fire, burn, and physical damaging ability. You can see this one triggering all the time in the intro video, where there's just constantly stuff bombarding from the sky. Some other fire constellations may be the Magi, which is going to give you Fissure, which is going to give you fire and burn damage with chances to stun targets, as well as the Phoenix, which gives you Phoenix Fire. However, this does lean more into the retaliation aspects of different kind of fire builds, and not so much for the standard Blackwater Cocktail or fire type of caster. We could take a look at what classes will play well with the Demolitionist, and the first thing we're going to look at is going to be the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor tends to be a dual-wielding ranged class, which works really well with our Fire Strike here. If we look at the first ability here, Range Expertise, this is going to give us extra elemental damage and extra attack speed, which means our fire strikes are going to be proccing more often. The second ability here, Bursting Rounds, also plays well because it gives us fire and damage, and this can also activate off the default weapon attack, which is going to be Fire Strike that's replaced our default attack. It has things like Word of Renewal, which will give us healing in the area, and then also some defensive and movement ability, that way we can reposition and survive. The Word of Pain has base fire damage to it, and then the Word of Agony gives fire damage multiplication. The Inquisitor also has things that are semi-similar to the Mortar Trap. It's the Runes. So this Rune of Kallistor, you lay it down and it arms, and then it has the Concussive Blast ability, which will deal physical and fire damage in the area with a chance to knock down the target. For more of the survivability, we have the Inquisitor Seal, and this is going to give us damage absorption and health regeneration, plus elemental resist while we stand in it. And then we have the Aura of Censure, and this is going to give us burn damage over time with fire damage, but importantly, it's going to give us the negative elemental resistance that we want, so that we can apply more of our fire damage or our lightning. And then if you choose to go towards the lightning route, there are a couple different options for that. One of the main ones is going to be the Stormbox here, and this is an overtime electrocute ability that reduces the defensive ability of the target. And they also have Storm Spread, which is very similar to the Bursting Rounds. However, it's just the piercing and electrocute and lightning version of that ability. So this class works really well. If you want to go towards the fire version or the lightning version, there is support for all of that. There is the elemental resist, which includes all three of the elemental types. Very strong combination together, especially if you're going to lean in towards any kind of ranged or dual wielding pistols. The next one we'll look at is going to be the Arcanist, and this together is going to make the Sorcerer class. While the Arcanist itself is not the most robust class in terms of survivability, it does have some things that synergize really well in terms of damage, and then also some things that just help with general survivability. The first thing is going to be the exchange here, and this is going to give you flat elemental damage and then a plus to a percentage of elemental damage. And then we have manifestation. So when we looked at the demolitionist skills, there were some of them that did physical damage when we're trying to lean towards fire. What this helps to do is convert 10% per level of that physical damage to elemental damage, so you're getting your damage applied with all your burn modifiers. And then if we look at the next two modifier abilities, Overload, it's going to give us extra burn damage. And then again with Elemental Balance, we're going to get extra burn and extra duration. Having mentioned the Arcanist defensive abilities, we're going to get into two very important ones. And this is Mirror. So this gives you a 3-second 100% damage absorption, even if you just have 1 point into it. It's a very strong ability to get out of jail free if something happens. And then following that up is going to be the Sphere of Protection. This is going to give you a percentage damage absorption that's going to apply to everything just as an automatic buff. And I think it can go up to like 25% or something like that. So a very significant damage reduction across the board. And then we have conversion here, and this is going to give you a percentage to reduce a lot of the CC in the game. As you get higher up into it, you're going to find that you're getting stunned and frozen and petrified more often, and that generally leads to a death sentence. So having the conversion to reduce that is very strong. Looking at other abilities that synergize with the Demolitionist, we have Inner Focus. This is going to give you spirit and offense per level, and it's just going to help you lean more into that glass cannon kind of damage. We also have Arcane Will here. This is similar to Blast Shield, so when you drop below a certain threshold, you're going to get a bunch of extra damage, and then you're going to get more defensive ability to help you survive. Another very important thing is Nullification, and you see this in a lot of builds for the higher SRs. There are a lot of really strong debuffs in the game, one of them being the Sundered ability, which is going to reduce all of your resistances and force you to take a lot more damage when you do get hit. There's also things that cut down your health by a percentage or your offensive or defensive ability, and Nullification kind of wipes all of that out and gives you a fresh slate and removes any of the debuffs. It also has the double effect of removing any of the positive buffs from the enemy who are in the range of you as well. So while the Arcanist isn't exactly the defensive stalwart that a soldier or an Oathkeeper might be, it does have some tools like the Mirror, the Sphere, and Nullification that really work to keep it alive. I would say those two classes are more of the popular Demolitionist class combos, and I myself have used them and I think they're pretty fun. However, anything here could really work. You could play a Shaman because they have some lightning. You could play a Soldier because they are very tanky and very defensive, so you can have them kind of pick up the defensive side of the class combo. And then even something like the Oathkeeper, you could use. This is a shield and sword kind of fire-based build, but if you're going to make a retaliation-based build, this would be a good class combination for the shield breaker. So a lot of different things that can pair with the Demolitionist. Feel free to explore. The first two that I had mentioned are probably the easiest and safest ways to play, but anything will work. I'll be doing one of these class guides just as a general overview for each of the classes in the game coming up here. But if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.